Hello, what I wanted to do was learn how to create dispersion images in Photoshop. Dispersion images are like these, where you see a subject and part of the image is dispersed or fragmented, coming in creative shapes. And there's multiple types of dispersion images I've seen. This is one type. Here you see another type. Here this one, is using drop watercolor kind of drops and brush strokes, whereas this one's squares cut out. And I found that this technique was just interesting, and I wanted to see how it was done, and I wanted to see if I could improve upon it in any way. Online I found tutorials that would help me do this in Photoshop, learn how to do it, and I went through them and I learned the basic technique, and I'm going to show it to you here. But before that, you need to understand just a couple simple concepts in Photoshop. It's layers and masks. And layers you can think of like pieces of cellophane or glass. You can stack them on top of one another, and as long as there's not paint on the piece of glass, you can look through and see what's below it. Well, here you have two layers. Imagine two pieces of glass. You have a blue layer and you have a red layer. And what you can do is you can drag one below the other, say take the blue glass, put it behind the red glass, and you'll see only red. And you can keep flipping them, and whichever layer is on top is the layer that you're going to see. Now sometimes you want to be able to take a layer and be able to see through part of it, not all of it, but part of it, and that's where you create a mask. And to create a mask, there's a command for it, and you create a mask, and you'll see here this white box appear next to it. That's the mask, and you can imagine it to be in essence another kind of overlay on that piece of glass. And on that then I can erase or write. And the kind of rule is that white reveals, black conceals. So if I take black and I paint onto that mask, and if you notice I've highlighted over here the mask, so my actions now are going to operate on the mask. You're going to see if I paint on that in black that the mask reveals. And if you look over at the mask, you see, okay, it has this black that I've painted, and where I painted, it's going to show the layer beneath, the mask. So it's going to show this red. And what I can do is do the reverse. If I make white my primary color in the brush, I can then paint back over, and again, I'm painting on the mask, not on the layer. So I can paint on the mask and cover things back up if I wish. And in this way I can control what appears to the user on multiple layers and stack them. Understanding that concept, what happens and how you create dispersion images is you basically have an image that you want, and you have to do a few things. You have to separate the object from the background layer. You have to fill in the background and as though the object was there. And then you have to create copies of the object, distort it, and use masks to paint over it to simulate this dispersion. And I'm going to show you that here. Here you see a photograph of a model I took. Here would be a rough cut of that model out of the background. And then this is the background with the model removed and me painting in and filling in what would be behind the model. Now I didn't do it very well here. I could do it better, but for these purposes this was just fine. So with that, the technique that you do is you take the background, you isolate it, you take the model, you isolate the model, you distort, make copies of the model, distort it, and use masks to paint on that distortion to make the appearance of the dispersion. So here you see the model grossly distorted. And now if I put the background behind her, put the model on, okay, here's the model with the background and distorted, and now I'm going to paint onto that a pattern and another pattern, and let me show you here what happens. There we go. The one copy of the distorted image, you see the mask that I've made, and I painted mostly black with this mask. And if I isolate and just show you the mask, you see, okay, there's mostly black there, and I used a brush and I came in and made all these shapes onto that mask to reveal the distorted image underneath. And now I also used a copy of the non-distorted model, as you see here, and I used a mask and I painted away or hid a portion of the model. And when you put those two together, you come up with this. And when you then add the background, whoops, if I do it right, if you add the background, you come up with this. So I'm starting to achieve the dispersion effect. It's not as pleasing as I would like. The model appears way too distorted. I don't like my handiwork with the brush. But what I did then was use some filters and other techniques to kind of minimize what I didn't like and bring it out more. But it's still not what I wanted. But to do this took a full day of me learning and making the technique and working with it to get to this point. I thought about it and said, okay, that's okay, but it's not really what I wanted. And once I see this and how this works, I don't like the fact that really it's not conserving the mass of the object. If you look here, for example, at the original one, now understanding this technique, you see that what they've done is taken the image of the young man here and they've duplicated it and distorted it. Here you're seeing a portion of his collar, which would be up here. Here you're seeing his ear, and it's all been distorted. Here you're seeing the ruffles of this sleeve, and they've all been distorted and then painted on. And if you look above his head, you've got these big squares of hair and his head. But if you look at this, there's far more squares of hair than there is actually taken from him. The mass is not conserved. There's a distortion. There's more of this painted material than there is of the actual model. So it's not realistic, and you start to see the magic behind it once you understand the technique. The same here. In this image, you see his hand. There's this pink flesh color, but that's not what was taken from here. So it's a distortion and a kind of a mimic of what might occur with dispersion. But to me, it's not true dispersion. So I wanted to figure out different ways to improve that. And so what I did was I took a picture of a sunflower, as you see here, and I improved my techniques, and I removed the flower from the background and was able then to just put the flower back and, using a mask, eliminate where I was going to put the dispersion. And if I turn the background on, you see, okay, I've removed this and used a brush. And then what I did was I copied the sunflower multiple times. Here you see 3 times. And each time I distorted the position and scale of the sunflower and painted portions of it in, so that now I had multiple copies that I was bringing into the effect. I didn't like it still. I thought, okay, that's one way, but I'm still not getting what I want out of this. So I took the sunflower again, and using a different technique, I got to here. But what I did was, and I liked this a little bit better, but it didn't have the amount of material that I wanted. Here was the sunflower again, isolating it from the background, taking the sunflower portion that I wanted, and to create this other portion, what I actually did was I took the original image and I made a copy of it, and I went and created a crystalline structure over it. I want to pixelate and crystallize. And this is a filter. It's going to take that object and it's going to create and manipulate it so that you have a crystal pattern over it. It forms into a crystal. And by doing this, I was able to select the individual crystal elements instead of using a brush, so that I could get actual pieces that were approximately the size that if I took all the crystals and added them together, I would come close to the size of my original flower. And I used that to create the mask that you're going to see right here. And then I took the image, the original sunflower, and I distorted it, moved it, shifted it, and then I took that mask that I had and put it over it. That's how I was able to achieve the effect that I had pieces of the sunflower that were now crystalline in shape and dispersing from the object, but I didn't have enough granules, and doing this effectively was problematic. So I thought of, okay, how can I improve upon this? I don't have enough mass there. I've lost portions of the flower. But I took that same crystalline approach, made a crystal of the flower as my selection. I selected crystals out of it. Then I selected the inverse of those crystals so that I had all the other crystals for the flower. And I got rid of all the ones that were not in my cutaway piece, and I put those here. And I took multiple layers of the flower and shifted them, so I actually had the same mass of the flower, but it in a couple different places and crystalline cut out. I liked this better. This was getting much closer to what I wanted. I'm able to actually have pieces of the flower that if you pushed all these pieces together, it would actually create the original flower. It's a jigsaw kind of thing that's been cut apart and done in a creative fashion. It still isn't what I want. I have some ideas about how to improve this further. I'm thinking about creating a grid pattern that slices the flower into multiple pieces, 1,000 pieces, and using filters to either distort those pieces as though the wind were blowing them, or to actually write programs that manipulate the pieces within Photoshop. That's an ambitious goal. But those are my steps so far in learning how to use Photoshop and create dispersion. And my innovation to the process is not using brush tools and stamps, but using crystalline structures to create cutouts or masks for the object so that you actually have cutouts and pieces that match. And thank you for your attention.